Hi, everyone. I am a member of the DEI committee. My name is Gabriella, and I am co-hosting this webinar along with Clara. I'll just introduce myself and then she'll introduce herself. But I am 22 years old. I just graduated from college and I joined the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee this past summer because I'm very passionate about DEI initiatives in all of the spaces that I am in, but the stuttering community is very personal and important to me. So it was important to me to be involved in that effort.
Hi everyone, I'm Clara. I'm 21 years old. I am graduating Pomona College in California this semester, and I also joined the DEI committee at its inception last summer. DEI has been very important for me doing work in the general disability space, and disability spaces at my school. As someone who grew up in Michigan and now, lives in California and has been in many different spaces, I'm really passionate about celebrating diversity and making sure that diversity is celebrated well and inclusively.
Okay, great. So let's get started. So this webinar is going to expand on our last webinar, if you were able to attend, which was really just an introduction to the DEI committee. So we are going to, talk a bit more in depth along with discussion on what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, but we're also going to add in conversations about bias and microaggressions. And we're going to do that through the lens of someone who stutters, really focusing on also the kind of bias and microaggressions that can occur for people who stutter. So let's go over our objectives. So our first objective is to provide a clear understanding of diversity and its role in DEI initiatives. We want to define all the different types of bias. So we have implicit or unconscious and explicit, along with the impact of that bias and microaggressions. And at the very end, we're going to sort of have a more overall discussion to really synthesize the information, and we're going to strategize ways to reduce individual bias, both our own and also within the stuttering community. So that being said, here are a few slides that kind of show, what this is about and, what we believe. And it is not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And then I think after we discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, this will make more sense if you don't have much exposure. So objective 1, what is diversity? So taken at its very simplest, diversity is the presence and participation of people of varying backgrounds, perspectives, and modes of thought. That includes people from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds. Diversity is really, it's for the benefit of everyone. It means that there are more diverse perspectives and there's more diverse solutions to problems. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important to celebrate and promote diversity. I think now we are just gonna do a little introduction icebreaker about that.
Yeah, so as a committee, we ourselves are trying to start the conversation on diversity and the many, many different ways that diversity manifests. So this is just a list. There can be diversity in age and thinking about the committee, but also thinking about the larger NSA community, age, income, education, marital status, religious status, geographic location, parental status, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religious, spiritual identity, physical, mental ability, disability, language ability. As a committee, we all have maybe a particular topic in terms of inclusion that we're maybe particularly passionate about. I can share, for me, thinking about how do you identify as a new NSA member in 2020. I was really curious about how is stuttering diversity celebrated within the NSA. I'm someone who was a bit more severe in my stuttering when I was younger. more so much more mild now, and my stuttering kind of comes and goes in being slightly more severe or being very, very, very mild. So I was very curious about studying diversity. And then I was also very passionate about bridging income and status as someone from Michigan. This sort of travel and all that is something that's very important. How can we bridge inclusivity for people of many different income backgrounds? So as a summary, I identify as someone being from Michigan of a middle class background, and I also identify very heavily with my disabled identity, slightly with my stutter, which I know not everyone considers their stutter a disability, which is okay. For me, I do, and I also have several other disabilities. So I consider I have a very strong disabled identity, which is for me. And then I also I think in the NSA in general, I am just kind of graduated from teen to young adult. So that's something that I identify with. And then, so I've talked a lot. So now it's time to have an icebreaker and for us to get to know each other. And of course, you don't need to share every single thing off this list. You can just sort of share about identities that you're passionate about bringing into the NSA. And yeah, overall, we're none of us are a checkpoint bulleted list. We are all people of many different identities and have many different topics and identifiers that we identify strongly with. So if anyone else wants to share, and I'm not sure, we're gonna have to figure out if it's gonna be a calling thing or a feel free to just blurt out. But I think for now we can say if you're ready, feel free to share.
I just can ask I'm on an iPad and your PowerPoint is only showing Carla's face. So could
Oh,
you eliminate the PowerPoint?
I think on your iPad you can change the settings. So I think on the you can sort of change it to be that you can just see the PowerPoint. I think if you click to get rid of show active speaker video, that might help.
No, is it because you have the PowerPoint up as to why I can't see anybody but Carla?
No, it should be the PowerPoint is what you should be seeing. So I think if you click if you see the settings show thumbnail video or show active speaker video, that should help. And if you want, maybe you could text in the chat and then we can help you further while other people discuss. Anyone want to share?
There we go. I was trying to unmute. Took me a minute. I'm Julie Marshall. I'm a member of the committee as well. I'm really happy to be on it. I'm very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a speech pathologist. I work at University of Memphis. Identify as female.
Hello.
Somebody need something? Oh, I heard somebody saying something. And I live in Memphis with my husband, and I have one son who's 29, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Matt?
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Maction. I'm a member of the DEI committee as well. And I would say the most prominent um, identities that I think about when I think about what what um, what describes myself. Um, I think about my Filipino American identity first. I feel like that's the first thing that comes to mind. How I navigate my life. I uh, navigate it through like a combination of like an Eastern and Western cultural lens. So I think it's pretty interesting, because I I I know that my life is a lot different, and I experience um, different privileges than people who were born in the Philippines and immigrated to the U.S. versus me being born in the US and like this is really all I know. So yeah, it growing up, it was a lot of like, it was a lot of like, like a clashing of cultures that wasn't really sure how to reconcile. But I feel like now, I'm in my 30s now, so I feel like I feel more secure in my Filipino American identity. And then and then and then I also think about my stuttering identity. I grew up as a covert stutterer, and then I uh, now my stuttering is more overt, but because I feel more comfortable with stuttering, it's not as pronounced as it used to be. Which is interesting. So, yeah, I just find it really cool that our stuttering identities are very fluid. We could feel one way about stuttering, like during a certain phase of our lives, but then it changes. So I like that diversity and identity isn't static, and then it um, it could change depending on where we are in life. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to share? And then if not, maybe Gabby, could you move to the next slide? And then I think maybe we can also talk about this as well. In addition to maybe introducing yourself a little bit, feel free to, we can also discuss ways that you have witnessed or felt diversity within the NSA community, ways you have not. And I'm actually very eager to learn from all of you, as I've actually only attended virtual conferences. I have not attended any in-person conferences yet. I will hopefully be attending this summer. So yeah, let's discuss diversity within the NSA specifically. And I kind of alluded to this earlier already, but something that was very interesting to me and was surprising is when I first joined the NSA, I sort of assumed that different forms of stuttering fluency and types of stuttering, you know, repetition, blocking versus elongations, would be sort of discussed or maybe sort of acknowledged a little bit more. And so then joining the NSA, I was sort of navigating this feeling of, oh, I stutter with repetitions and blocks, but my fluency is quite strong at the moment. And so where does my stuttering diversity within that? Because I think we do have really beautiful diversity within the NSA community in terms of the many different ways and the fluency or severity we stutter. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Okay, well, I'll chime in. I truly just to say a little point about this. I had to download some Zoom platform, and maybe this is a different type of Zoom thing. I don't know what the difficulty is, but moving on. My name is Arnetta Jones. I live in California. I'm still not really clear on the diversity, equity, and inclusion direction we're trying to take here. But when I think, the first and foremost thing on my mind, because I am a Black American, is how many Black people are in the room. So truly race and ethnicity is one of the main things that I think of. Above all of the examples that you gave, that's what I think of. And as far as focusing on the NSA, I've been involved with the NSA since the 80s. And I can tell you, the NSA is a totally different place now than what it was back then. You know, I mean, the last time I attended a conference, I believe was 94, and I have never attended a conference since then, primarily because all of the fun and familiarity and truly, let me just clarify, the NSA was the NSP, now it's the NSA, and it was a kind of a different dynamic then. So it's hard to even try to compare that with current. But I didn't feel the love that what I'm hearing about the conferences now. So I think, and plus, when I have looked at, you know, information reports, people writing in, following the conferences, I'm surprised to see the number of Black people attending. I mean, now they aren't clearly anywhere near the majority, but I contribute that to the NSA's outreach. It must be something, the word must be getting out there. So I'm really excited about that. And I think, you know, but, you know, when you know that you are walking into an organization or a program or what have you, where you're going to be the only Black person in the room, there's some hesitancy there. You know, it just is. You know, not to say these people are going to be mean and rude to you, is just what it is. But there must be some comfort or what have you that has allowed people to come into the room and enjoy it. So I feel that within the NSA, something positive is happening there. I mean, so if that's what you're asking about, so that's kind of the diversity I have witnessed, and also just through the Zoom, the NSA Connects, I feel like I am pleased with the diversity. Now, granted, I'm not going zooming into all of those connects, but the ones I do participate in, I'm very excited about, you know, where things are going. So I feel good about it.
Yay. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's so cool to hear about the history you've had with the NSA. Like I said, I've only been in the NSA for 4 years. So getting to hear this history and this progress you've seen, I really, it's really, really, really awesome to hear.
Yeah, just to sort of also, you know, join the conversation. I joined the NSA, like, I guess in 2019. So even in that short amount of time, I have also really noticed a big difference. But because 2019 was my first conference, and I really like met maybe 2 or 3 other Latinas who stuttered, and now it's like everywhere I go, you know, I see people who are Latina, which I think just goes to show like how much the outreach and also how these, you know, events like these are really good at, you know, sort of reaching people and why it's so important, and also hearing feedback from people is really important too. So that's why it's so exciting when people share. So I really appreciate that. Okay, does anyone else have anything to say? Because we can move on.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. There will be plenty of other time for discussion. It's kind of worked into the whole presentation, so don't worry about that. So let's just talk a little bit about equity. So equity refers to equal access to opportunities and just, fair, and impartial treatment. So this follows from the recognition that not all people start on the same field, right? People, you know, equity is distinct from equality. And as you can see in the picture, the two characters don't start on the same field. So equity is really important because it means that every individual or group is given, the resources and opportunities that they need to reach an equal outcome. And that's obviously something that is still, much has to be done, but equity is something that at the NSA, in part of the DEI committee, we are really working and strategizing ways that we can, bring equity to the NSA. So, and then moving on to the last, we have inclusion. So inclusion refers to a sense of belonging in an environment where all feel welcomed, accepted, and respected. And so to build an inclusive environment, there must be, shared belief in the celebration of diversity and, strong values for sort of that interpersonal communication and being kind to each other and showing empathy. And those are things that we will talk about. But I just wanted to give a little brief overview of what DEI is and what we stand for. So here are the 7 acts of inclusion. So, to work to include other people, you deepen your self-awareness. You acknowledge what you don't know and the gaps in your understanding. You create connections, you're vulnerable, and if you are able, you do invest. You can talk the talk, but when you do invest and you give part of yourself, that is really important.
Awesome. And now I will be talking about bias. So bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions. And bias can occur in both the unconscious and a conscious manner. And to most simply summarize it, implicit bias is unconscious, while explicit bias is conscious. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, perfect. So explicit bias is the one that we're probably all much more familiar with. It's when the person is clear about their feelings and attitudes and their behavior towards a person or group is intentional. And this can include things like verbal or physical harassment, or more subtle, such as inclusion. And the person holding that bias is aware that they are holding it. And so I think a very clear example we can all think of is when I know, at least for me, during my childhood, I was often very subconscious of when I would notice that when I would give presentations in school, they would often have a criteria for grading that would say use of and basically stuttering. And so I think as people who stutter, we definitely might encounter explicit bias in our daily life where people are directly, maybe making fun of people who stutter and are explicitly expressing the idea that a way someone talks is maybe a indicator of them as a person, or have other judgmental sayings or actions. Next slide, please. So implicit bias is the one that's a little bit more tricky, and it's the one that I think you really have to start talking about directly in order to start unpacking. And it's when the person has certain attitudes or stereotypes that affect their understanding, actions, or decisions, but in an unconscious manner. And it's subtle and happens automatically without us knowing. And I think especially in today's society, as we're talking more and more about bias and diversity, I think a really common subject that comes up is, oh, well, I believe everyone is equal, so therefore I do not have implicit bias. But it's often the case, and it is the case, that implicit bias happens for everyone, whether or not, no matter what your beliefs and values are. So implicit bias can be in direct contradiction to our beliefs and values because it is unconscious and it's not something we are consciously trying to impose on anyone. So there are many different types. Next slide, please. This is just an example, and this is a slide taken for talking about workplace discrimination. So as you can see here, we have many different kinds of bias being discussed on this slide. I know something that's been very commonly talked about for NSA conferences is, for example, ageism, and making sure that we are including speakers of all age ranges and not necessarily maybe those who are middle-aged. And then another maybe common one that we might maybe think about more for the NSA and maybe spaces like NSA conferences is affinity bias. So a maybe bias to maybe engage with those who maybe appear similar to you at the risk of potentially unconsciously maybe making someone who's different feel excluded. And this is something that of course is unconscious. And let's see, or some other, and I'm sure you all are looking at the slide right now. So maybe I'll talk about one more and then we can move on. But let's see, sorry, my head is processing here. Let's see. And confirmation bias is also one I think we often see in the media. So thinking about how we are learning new things. Are we learning new things to confirm what we already know, or are we learning new things to expand our knowledge? And then of course, on the left, we have more sort of demographic things like how someone's looks, their weight, their name, and gender. So I think we can move on.
Okay, so I will take over from here. We are going to do a brief overview of microaggressions. Just a definition of microaggressions. They are comments or actions that subtly and often unconsciously, so microaggressions can be sort of an indicator of an implicit bias, express a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized or historically excluded group. So in other words, microaggression occurs as a result of implicit bias. It's an indicator. So following a microaggression, if you're on the receiving end, you might be thinking, did I hear that correctly? Like, should I say something? Will people think I'm overreacting? Will this hurt more than it helps? I know for me, that's something that has really happened to me. And I feel like that's something that has happened to me both as someone who is from a Mexican background and also someone who stutters. I know when I stutter on my name, people might laugh or they might ask me if I don't remember my name or, things like that. And I don't know if I should say something or not because because in my mind, I'm thinking I could ruin, our interaction. I could make it awkward. And I'm like, what should I do? So that's kind of the thought process that, you experience when you are on the receiving end of a microaggression. And because it is because it is a form of implicit bias, it means that the person who often, makes the microaggression, they may not know. So they may not know that the impact of that microaggression, is hurting or it is affecting the person who is receiving it. So I'm going to pose the question, what are ways you have experienced microaggressions as a person who stutters? Do you experience a sort of moral dilemma? Should I say something? Should I not? And I know this can be a very personal question because it can come with, a lot of, a history of behavior and treatment. So if you don't want to share, that's completely fine. So I know
This is not,
Oh, okay. I was going to share one more. So something that happens to me both, I think this is an example of like, colliding or intersectional identities that happens to me, is that, I speak Spanish. And so sometimes when I am talking to someone in the United States and I am speaking English, but I start stuttering, people might have presume that I don't speak English. And so they've like said something or they've acted like I don't understand what they're saying, even though I am a native speaker of English. And it's happened the same also with Spanish speakers where, because I'm stuttering, they may think that I don't speak Spanish, because we're in the United States. And I feel like, speaking Spanish can be such a large part of someone who is, who's someone who is Latinx of their identity. And so I feel like those are ways that I've experienced it, both as a person who stutters and as someone who comes from a Latina background.
One thing I was just going to add to was something that I think I've been very privileged in my life as a white woman with invisible disabilities to not receive a lot of microaggressions in my life, but an interesting example, not of stuttering, but of just speech differences in general. My mother grew up with a pretty severe speech problem, and so particularly in regards to pronunciation. And a microaggression I know she's received throughout her life is people correcting her on her pronunciation, and or sort of making a big deal out of the difference in her speech, even though she's still being understood, and sort of that constant pointing out of, oh, you talk very differently from me. But anyone else?
So we
Well,
had an experience, this is Julie. We had an experience at the university where we did a DEI event. And at the very end, we were taking comments and someone raised their hand and said, well, I wish there would have been more emphasis on LGBTQ. And it was really a valid point. They did kind of gloss over that aspect of diversity. But someone else in the audience kind of went on the offense. Black woman saying that that was really trivial compared to what Black people have been through. And it like turned into this shouting match, and everybody was just sort of stunned and didn't know what to say. And it's kind of like that thing paragraph there on the slide. You know, did I interpret that? What should I do? I don't know what. Nobody knew what it was. So, but we did end up having a debrief with everybody. Because we didn't handle it well in the moment, because it was a macroaggression both ways, and it was crazy. So if you don't do the right thing right away, you go back and try to make it right.
Thank you. Alicia? Alicia's very nice.
Hi, I'm Alicia Vasquez. I'm also a member of the DEI committee. Questions, like Abby, I am Latina. My mother is from the Dominican Republic and my father is Mexican. And especially thanks to my father, I have very, very pale skin. So I do also get often, especially even when I'm in my home countries, I visit DR often, have a house out there, and I'm like, I live here. You see me here every year. Also, I personally wouldn't be in this part of the country if I wasn't native to the language. But people often, if I'm stuttering in Spanish, often say, oh, it's okay, I speak English. And I'm like, well, I can speak Spanish. And they continue to just speak in English to me. And I'm like, I'm going to continue to stutter. Or I'll tell them, it's like, it's not going to be any better in English than it would be in Spanish. And when it happens to me in America too, I'm just like, I'm going to stutter in any language that I speak of, regardless what that language is. Now, may I have certain secondary behaviors in one language that I don't have in another? Yes. And that can make it be perceived that I don't stutter as much. But in reality, those are also just secondary behaviors that I have learned in one language. But my stutter is the same in whatever language that I speak. And people often will carry those microaggressions, or even just in the Latin community. In Latin families, it is very common for people to give you nicknames. And oftentimes those nicknames are just your biggest insecurities. And for you to say anything about it is like, why are you overreacting? This is just a joke. And that's like this huge microaggression that people and I mean, they do that in love. It really is your own blood. the majority of the times. But and that also kind of divulges into different aspects. But just the fact that people they will, they just make jokes on your behalf, and that's just something that I've always experienced. But those are just one of the very many microaggressions, or I've also just had, or I've had teachers in classes in the past who they'll just come up with me. We're doing an activity in the class, and they also think that they're helping, but they'll just hand me a piece of paper and a pen of like, oh, you can write down what you can just write down what you're going to say for this class discussion. And I just look at them and I'm like, that's like, so you don't want me to speak because I'm going to stutter. But those are just a few of the things that I have experienced as well.
That was really insightful. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to talk?
I just wanted to say, now that I'm thinking about these microaggressions, one of the things that, and I've been told that, as a person that stutters, we make too much of this, but, that situation where you have to go around the table and introduce yourself. Well, now, I have had instances, and there are people at the table who I've known. And I have had instances where, they get to me, I'm struggling to say my name, and then somebody says it for me. And I feel like, well, truly, I feel as I am in the midst of this block, just give me the satisfaction to know I can say this word for myself. Now, that's what was going in my head. It's not like I said it to them, but then I'll kind of, kind of give off a little laugh and then, proceed to struggle to say my name. And somehow they feel that that's helping me, but it's not. It's so irritating to me when people do that. And I haven't. There was one time where I felt the real need to set that person straight, and I just thought, it was in a church meeting, and I just felt this scenario was not the time. But I don't stand for that kind of stuff, now. That's not going to go. But I just felt in that situation is best I just set it aside. But that's one thing. And then also this whole impression that when you're stuttering and speaking to someone, then they kind of respond to you like, okay, you're a little kind of slow, maybe, kind of something's wrong. Like back in the day, we would say, trying to act like you were somewhat kind of retarded, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay, great. So let's move on. So this is just a quick slide on the impact of microaggressions, but I feel like we have really sort of covered this all, and sort of the emotional, moral kind of, I think, toll that, microaggressions, especially over a long period of time, can have on someone. Even if, you sort of try to talk to yourself and it's like, it's not that big of a deal. When you add up constant microaggressions, it really does impact people and their, how they view themselves, their identity, their self-esteem, how they view themselves in the world. So that's why it's really good to be mindful, I think. And we're going to talk more about implicit bias, you know, and how it relates to microaggression.
Yes, so here we have, so this is the end of the sort of slide lecture-y part of this workshop. And then now basically we have three discussion prompts that sort of focus on summarizing the topics we've discussed today and really expand on that for the context of the NSA and our experience as people who stutter. So we have, you know, ways of reducing individual implicit bias, which includes, you know, sort of taking, you know, sort of centering yourself and the person and navigating the experience. Well, sorry, recentering this. I'm sorry, I was trying to look because I feel like we have here two different sort of the individual implicit bias in terms of stuttering at the top, and then also navigating the NSA community at the bottom. But in terms of when we are navigating the NSA conference, you know, what are some, and when, as we, you know, we've talked about implicit bias as people who stutter and how people are implicitly biased against us. So thinking about the NSA, you know, what are some implicit biases that you hold? And before you found the NSA, did you hold any implicit biases about people who stutter? Let's see. Does anyone would like to go first? And then I will also frame my response too.
Well, I know for me, coming to the conference, I think when I was like, I just graduated from high school, and I still was under the impression potentially that my stutter would go away. I actually thought I'm gonna go to the conference, my stutter will go away, and then I'll go to college. Um, but so I do think that that is actually a form of implicit bias, because even when I was there, I was thinking, well, mine's gonna go away, theirs isn't. But I think it sort of was very hard for me to sort of come to that understanding. Just also because hearing other people who stutter, you know, it was kind of just, it really hit me that, you know, this is, even though it really had affected me before, it really hit me. And I think because of that, it really allowed me to expand, you know, my own worldview about, you know, people with, I guess, more individual and invisible disabilities, you know, and it sort of really allowed me to sort of know, you know, what people experience. And I think it's really made me more sensitive, even if people, you know, don't have a speech disorder, you know, if they have a strong accent or something like that. I feel like it's really made me focus and, you know, be more patient, because I understand what it can be like, you know, to, you know, be on the receiving end of someone who is not so understanding or patient.
Yeah, and what you just said reminded me of, I think, of course, we have the implicit bias that, and of course has some truth and of course doesn't, that, you know, sort of people who maybe look like ourselves or have the same cultural background in many different ways that culture holds. Something related to my stutter that's actually, I think, very interesting and was at one point a little bit stressful, because I was sort of like, oh my gosh, I am totally perpetrating an implicit bias. About 2 years ago, my stutter was in a period where my stutter was a little bit more severe and still on the mild and the stuttering spectrum. But I was noticing that I was starting to stutter a bit when I was saying unfamiliar words, and that usually included people's names that were not the, you know, European biblical names that I may be more accustomed to hearing. And so particularly at my school, international students from Africa, in particular, I would notice that I would have a hard time saying their names. And so it was quite terrible, because I was totally, you know, kind of perpetrating, I guess implicitly, not in my brain, but in my voice, this bias of words that were quote unquote easier for me to say, words that I was more familiar with, I didn't stutter. And then with this period of time, I noticed I was stuttering quite a lot when I was saying names that I had maybe not heard of before meeting this person. So a slight frame from the prompt, but an example that for me, I noticed my stutter was making an implicit bias that I held in my mind, which is, you know, being a familiarity and being, yeah.
And I'll
Lindsay?
just follow up on what Arnetta was talking about with people assuming that you're slow, or not capable or whatever it is. I was out with a woman who stutters that I was working with, and we went to the mall just to do some, you know, open stuttering, I guess. She was afraid, so I said, okay, well, I'll do it. I'll do it first. So we go up to the information desk, and I stuttered asking for where a certain store was. And the person answered, but they answered her. They looked at her, gave her the answer. Like, the one who stuttered there is not going to be able to comprehend the answer, so I'm going to tell it to this other person. It was just an obvious thing that people who stutter obviously go through all the time, or some of the time. But that reminded me of that story. I was like, I'm right here. You can talk to me.
Thank you, Lindsay. Or wait, Alicia, who was raising their hand?
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I can to speak to the question here as far as before found out about the NSA, what kind of implicit of the biases that I would have of people who stutter. So me growing up, I didn't really know anybody who stuttered. So all my thoughts and emotions were all within myself as far as what I thought about what other people would be when they stutter, how they thought about, you know, being a person that has a stutter and stuff in this world. My first conference was back in, I think, 2020 or 21. So I made it a point to, you know, I would like to see more people that stutter, to know that I'm not the only one in my neighborhood, in the city, and the state that has a stutter. I want to be able to see and hear, you know, other people that stutter. And it was interesting that not everybody has necessarily like a negative outlook on their stutter. Like, I had a negative outlook on my stutter for a long time, and it was great to see how they were able to turn their challenge into speaking into something that was a positive experience. Like, even they're able to make a joke about it. I've never been able to joke about my stutter. So it was just amazing to be able to see how not everybody, you know, decides to take it as a personal challenge. Everybody's on their individual journey, of course, as far as acceptance and um, being able to stutter openly. So that was a refreshing experience for me to see. And then just the difference in, you know, from mild to severe. I didn't realize, you know, that people that do have a stutter, that identify as a person who stutters, I would have to ask them if they are a person that stutters. They're like, yeah, I am. I said, oh, I couldn't tell. So it's just interesting, you know, as far as your identity is, how mild to moderate to severe your stutter is, and the emotional impact it has on you. So I had my own, you know, implicit thoughts about other people that stutter. And when I was able to get around a group of others, it was able to open my eyes to a lot of different things.
I had I've been, I mean, some of these questions are really kind of hard to think on, but okay. Anyway, just been reading over this question about implicit biases that you hold before you found the NSA. Well, okay, I didn't hold, I do, but I can tell you an implicit bias that I hold now, that I found the NSA, because I never heard of a covert stutterer until I was involved in the NSA. And it's been a while now, but I didn't know if it was new or what, because hadn't heard it, when I first joined the NSA, but after some years, I'm hearing this word covert and thinking, what is that? And even though, now I feel like when I hear someone talk about being a covert stutterer, I almost feel a level of phoniness. I think that's so, and I've heard explanations of why people do it, job performance, trying to move up in the company, an embarrassment if they do, don't want to show that side to their family, that kind of stuff, I guess. But I'm almost feel like when people talk about being a covert stutter, I feel like they just haven't done the work. And I'm not talking about going through speech therapy. I'm talking about being who you are and accepting who you are. But, that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Alicia, do you still want to share real quick?
Yeah, I'll share. I was actually gonna say something very similar to what Lindsay was saying about how also before being a part of the NSA, I didn't really know very many people who stuttered, and if so, it was just people that I saw in passing in speech therapy or in college. I did have a friend who stuttered, but he stuttered because he had a stroke at 19 and developed a stutter after having a stroke. And while we could relate on some things, the backgrounds of our stutter are very different. But so, going and a few years ago as well, I was also a very different person than I am now, a lot more reserved. And so I thought, okay, everyone in the NSA is kind of like this, like people who stutter, we're shy, we're quiet, we don't really talk, we don't really go out, we don't really do all these things. And when I went, my first conference was in California, in Newport Beach. And from the very first, I got there very late, very, very, very late at night. But from the very first morning that I arrived, immediately, I was like, okay, I was wrong. I was like, I saw people, I hadn't even had my morning coffee yet. I was sitting on the couch half dead because I got in at like 3 a.m. in the morning. And I saw these two old timers. One is sitting next to me on the couch, one walks into the door. They start yelling at each other from across the room, full on stuttering. And I look at them, I'm like, huh? I'm like, how are you doing that? I'm like, how are you yelling, stuttering from across the room? Like, are you not worried that people are gonna hear you? Like, and then so that was like welcome to the NSA. That was my introduction to the NSA. I was like, okay, maybe this is not what I'm thinking. And at that point, I had also told my job, I was like, yeah, the conferences, um, everything kind of wraps up by like 4 p.m. After dinner, like 6. Like I'll bring some work. I can do some work. I'll probably be in bed by like 8 or 9 p.m. I don't think I saw my bed before 2 or 3 in the morning every single night that I was there. Just people like, hey, let's go out to dinner, or in the hotel lobby, sitting up for hours, talking, just doing things, going out with people. And I'm like, okay, so like, we're not just shy and quiet, and we're not just this like one type of people. We still go out and do things, and we'll go out to the bar and drink and go out and dance and go out and do these things, go out to dinner. And just, I did feel bad for the servers, because the servers were like, huh? They're like, everyone here is stuttering, and the puzzle look on the server's face. But I'm like, you guys, like, I was like, wow, I was like, this is absolutely not what I thought people who stuttered acted like when they were around people. And I mean, like, people that I met at that 2022 conference that became such friends with, that we ended up going to a few like music festivals together. And I'm like, okay, like I never really saw myself doing this, and this completely like changed my perspective on things. Of like, hey, like, you can still do things that other people do. But yeah, it was definitely something that I held before like joining the NSA, for sure.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I think this is me. This is just right before our discussion. So there's some words for thought before the discussion. So just kind of, going over what we just talked about with implicit bias and microaggressions, both being on the receiving end or being on the perpetrating side, watch your reactions. As I said, as it says, if people don't feel safe being honest around you or being themselves, then they'll hide parts of themselves, which I think is only to the detriment of people around them. Let others talk, which I think obviously as people who stutter, we already are very conscious of, but just a reminder, listen with intent. Um, people will engage with you if they feel like you're truly listening. So these are all ways, I think, to sort of, focus on including people and eliminating or working to alleviate implicit bias. And then just the little concluding paragraph, remember that your own experience may be different from other people's. So it's important to be empathetic and not be quick to judge. And especially listen to those who have been historically underrepresented. And especially those that come from marginalized communities. Diversity is about unleashing innovation and having more diverse perspectives in the room to come up with solutions. You can't do that if you don't listen, if you're not empathetic, and you don't allow people to be their true and authentic selves.
Yay! So we have gone through the core components of the workshop, and it's now time for the final best part, which is a final discussion. So we have 3 prompts here, and I think we have a really great group of people here, and I'm sure the discussion will sort of ebb and flow depending on what we find most interesting. So I'll go ahead and read all 3 of these questions, and feel free to maybe pick the one that most speaks to you. How might bias affect your experience connecting with others at the NSA conferences? So for example, I haven't been to an in-person conference yet, but I definitely can imagine that I might be more inclined to connect with women at the NSA conference, and a gender bias might very well affect my experience at the NSA conference. Might feel more inclined to connect with younger folks like me. So many different possibilities to that question. And then thinking about how we can combat that and then help grow the NSA conferences to be a place where our bias, not just ours, but the group's bias, is submerged, and we can have more diverse experiences connecting with others of different backgrounds. And then of course, how does bias affect your experience as a person who stutters? And then, yeah, like I sort of just said, what are some ways that the stuttering community can work to overcome individual and group biases to help create a welcoming, supportive environment for everyone? A very deep question, so we can understand if we need to take a little bit of time to think about it. But as soon as you have something you want to say, feel free to share.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremiah, and I'm a person who stutters. I'm gonna answer number three. Like, what are some ways that the stuttering community can work to overcome that? I think if we just all try to come together, if we're like black or white, or just like if we're like a part of the LGBTQ plus community, or if we're like more on the religious side, I think if we came together like in a workforce, or like if we came together as a team, I think more people will just like learn and hear about how different people stutter. Because like, yes, we may all like look differently, but like as we all heard um doing the Zoom call, it's just we all stutter. Like we may like cover stutter, like we may like have like repetitions wise, but I just think if we just all come together and just try to teach people who don't stutter what are ways that we do stutter. Like, okay, like don't laugh like when we're stuttering, or like, okay, like give us like, yeah, just like give us like the space and time. So I think just us coming together. So I guess like what I'm trying to say is just like put away the biases and just come as a person who stutters. So yeah, thank you.
I feel like also, as far as in the community, like the stuttering community, um, kind of being able to evaluate your thoughts about people who actually do not have a stutter, because you have, um, support family members, parents, the spouses of people who stutter, who don't actually have a stutter themselves. So it's kind of hard to feel like, do they really understand where I'm coming from? Do they really understand the struggles and the looks, and people overlooking you for jobs, and people not thinking a lot of you because of the way that you speak? So I think having, kind of being able to have those kind of discussions with the people that don't stutter, as far as, the why they are the supporters that they are. They might not have the same experiences as we do, but, because I feel like there's a little underlying um, of a bias to people that don't stutter, but yet they are a support. I mean, even my mom still like attempts to help me with certain words, or she knows I'm in the middle of a word and I've told her I don't know a whole bunch of times to allow me to get my words out. I'm a grown woman. You don't need to say my words for me anymore. But that want to help, but you don't really understand that, that this is a victory of mine that I need to overcome. So, but I feel like, kind of understanding the allies and the parents and the people that don't have a stutter is important.
I think another way to help any kind of gathering feel more inclusive is to actively seek out your speakers and your presenters from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I feel like when I first came to the NSA conferences or even events, I went to some events before I went to a conference, it was a bit like overwhelming and intimidating, I think, because a lot of people seem to know each other, which I know was not meant in like an unkind way. I think it also is my own anxiety about social situations, but I did feel like almost like, is this, am I feeling like how I did in like high school or middle school? And so I think I feel like now, with new programs or this, like the dinner program and stuff, I do think that people are very welcoming to first timers. But I do think that, kind of trying to, make sure that, new people are included is really important. And I mean, it makes sense that people who know each other, want to hang out and they're seeing each other again for the first time after a year. But that was definitely something that I experienced when I first came um, to the NSA. And I guess that I don't think that really maybe is a form of bias, but yeah.
Well, I wanted to kind of tag on to what Gabriella said, because um, I've made up my mind this year that I am going to the conference. So believe me, I'm setting my alarm clock for tomorrow, and I'm ready to log in. But anyway, and all I have is that first conference I went to. That's the only experience I had. And I do realize that, people are coming with, friends and what have you. I don't have a local support group here. And so I really don't have that connection, as a lot of people probably will. And, during my stuttering journey, socializing was something I really avoided because I really could not say my name. So I couldn't just walk up to someone and, start talking, trying to introduce myself. So, I'm even now at this point, at this stage in my life, I am thinking about this conference, and, how do because I'm going to have to, really step out of my comfort zone. Now, would I approach, a group of people who look like they're good for, I'm not saying good friends, but they know each other, and, just kind of butt in and say, oh, hi, I'm, going on. I don't know, but I'm having these scenarios in my mind and wondering if they're going to be friendly, if they're going to, just tolerate me for a few chit chat in introduction and act like I'm, stepping into their own conversation. I don't know, but I'll just have to deal with it when it happens. But and getting back to our previous discussion, more than likely they're not going to be black. If they were black, that'd be a different story. But just trying to get to know the people at the conference, you just don't want to connect yourself with just the black folks there, so but as I say, I know I'm going to be really stepping out of my comfort zone. But then what I have realized over this journey also is that I can be a really social person, and that's surprising to me, because I never I avoided social situations. But anyway, I don't know, I'll deal with it. But thanks.
When I'm hearing you all discuss, I keep thinking about, like, I don't know, my high school cafeteria experience, where like it tended to be pretty, racially segregated, gender-wise segregated, and I think it's so challenging. I think in our discussion today, we've sort of highlighted how we have this commonality in how, like, the fact that we all stutter and we have this commonality. We also, of course, have many different experiences of stuttering and experiences in our way of life that very much are affected by other identities that we have, we talked about earlier. And I think it's just so interesting because I know, at least I think not the way I was raised, but I think I definitely have the implicit bias that I think I've worked on a lot last few years, but I definitely think in high school, this bias of, oh, maybe another young white woman is someone who I'm going to have most in common with. Therefore, I should talk to them first. They're going to more easily be my friend. But I think as coming to the NSA and having discussions online, sort of seeing that one that can create, the more that people, particularly the people who are in the majority, group up, that can make whoever does not fit in that majority view feel excluded. And I've also experienced this as someone from Michigan, being in California, where everyone sort of assumes that California culture is what everyone knows, and just sort of doesn't sort of see how that can alienate people who aren't familiar with that sort of cultural. I'm not describing it very well, but I think I'm really grateful that we're having this discussion today, because I think it's something that's definitely perhaps a little bit taboo, but it's also very important. So I think I sort of wanted to sort of put in my that I'm really happy to hear everyone's thoughts today, and how we're all discussing this important topic of how we can balance celebrating and pointing out the diversity and acknowledging the different experiences we had. But like Jeremiah said, emphasize that we're all people who stutter. So.
That was a really great synthesis of the comments that we just had, and I definitely agree with all, that we all obviously are people who stutter, but there's still, a lot to be done, and that's why we have, started the DEI committee. So we are always taking suggestions. We really do want to be representing, what people at the conference or what people who are just part of the stuttering community feel. So, feel free to always reach out. And I guess before we wrapped up, does anyone have any closing thoughts or comments or answers to these questions?
Okay, well, I feel like I'm talking way too much, but I'm just curious to know what, how, what is the NSA's plan for using this information? I mean, have things been done before now? Or is this just gathering information for things in the future? So what is that?
Well, this has sort of been in the works, I think, for the last few years. At this past conference, there was a Black Indigenous people of color sort of think tank. So it really was, I think, a very productive discussion. It was very well attended, and I think we also in the think tank got to see like what efforts have been made, especially I think in marketing and in outreach, and sort of diversifying even like the people that you see on like on social media for the NSA, because all of those sorts of things. I think it really does affect, if people want to join an organization where they see people that look like them, I think. But obviously, and then another thing is, even in the past few years, there have definitely been more, I think, workshops geared towards different communities. Like one of the workshops that I did was stuttering, like as I forget what it's called, but it was like stuttering as a speaker of a second language, or stuttering or stuttering like in languages, or bilingualism or something. And that was really well attended too, not by just Spanish speakers, but by people who spoke English and another language. And I think so there are a lot of, I think, more workshops geared towards different communities. There are the NSA Connect sessions, but there obviously is a lot more, I think, that needs to be done. And so that's sort of why this whole formalized committee, I think, has started. And so obviously it's not just information gathering. We meet, I think, quite often, and we do have involvement from the greater organization. So it clearly is a work in progress, but I think that it's very positive, and I think after even this webinar, I feel very optimistic.
Hey, everybody, this is Pam, not to butt in, but Angela, you had your hand raised a couple moments ago.
I did. I felt the moment passed. So I just like left it alone. Thanks, Pam.
No problem.
Are there any closing comments before we wrap up?
I also did just want to say, just adding on to what you were saying, definitely in the last few years, there have been more added workshops. Just in this past year, I held a workshop of stuttering in a Latin household. Growing up stuttering in a Latin household, that was actually geared more towards parents. And also I feel like just whole I'd say, and just also workshops that I want to bring as well, but just they have also been moving more towards having a diverse set of workshops, but also opening the diversity of who they are set for. I know there have also been talks about bringing in different workshops for partners of people who stutter, which haven't really been done so in the past, as they are part of our community as well. I can also just tell you that not this year, but next year, I do plan on hosting a workshop for parents who stutter. And I mean parents like for parents who themselves stutters. I know there are a lot of workshops for parents of children who stutter, but I have never seen one for a parent who stutters. And then of course we had the BIPOC think tank, which was actually hosted by Angela in Christian this year. Also the Stuttering While Black that was hosted this past year as well. And through the NSA survey, the conference surveys, that is the point of the year where they are collecting the information. And so no, the surveys from 2 years ago is what, and 3 years ago is what brought forward these specific workshops. And also the ones that we received from this year, we're actively making changes as well. And you know, yes, like our Netta, you said you've been a part of the NSA or NSP since the 80s. And I've spoken to a lot of people who have also been a part of the NSA for that long. And I agree that it has changed significantly, but you know, change does not have a cap. There is just, you cannot set a limit on how much change that one can commit to. You know, the NSA is so much more diverse than what it was, but that doesn't mean that it needs that's done. You know, that there's still so many more ways that we can evolve to the current needs. And I think at the pace where we're going, we are also just taking it one step at a time while making active changes within the NSA. And of course, you know, we are always open to feedback from everybody.
Matt?
Hey, I just wanted to share that Clara and Gabrielle, you both did an amazing job with this presentation. Like everything was so clear, like very informational too, and I think it's really important for the NSA to get like a really good foundational crash course in implicit bias and diversity because yeah, it's for sure needed. This webinar kind of reminded me of my own implicit biases when I attend the NSA conferences. I've been going for, I think this upcoming conference would be my 10th year going, and I feel like the more I've gone to these conferences, the more I've just kind of settled into spending time with like a specific group of people throughout the whole conference and kind of closing myself off to like meeting new people. And I think it's because there's always a risk in just in the assumption that, oh, I probably don't have much to relate to with this person. Or so I think going into this conference, I'll keep an open mind, like I might be surprised. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We definitely really enjoyed putting it together. I feel like it was really informative for me too. So, thank you so much, and it was great hearing everyone's thoughts. Clara, do you think we should end a few minutes early?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you all. And I think especially with these topics, it's a little bit taboo. So I think the more we talk about it, the less taboo it becomes, and the easier to talk about it becomes. And then the more change happens, and the more we can connect individually and as a whole. So I'm excited to continue the conversations and hopefully see people at the conference.
Yeah, thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you.